Put your hands behind your back, the officer said, while the HOA president smiled. Phones were already out. Neighbors lined the sidewalk like an audience waiting for a verdict. The HOA president stood a few feet away, arms crossed, chin lifted, watching the scene she created unfold exactly the way she wanted. Her smile wasn't relief. It was victory. She had called the police on me 5 minutes earlier. Not because I was violent. Not because I was threatening anyone. But because I didn't obey her. She's been warned, she told the officers loudly, making sure everyone could hear. He refuses to follow HOA rules. He's trespassing. The word trespassing hung in the air like a charge already decided. I stood still. Calm. Hands visible. No shouting. No arguing. The more silent I stayed, the louder she became. She pointed at me again, this time with confidence, like she owned the ground beneath my feet. I told him this community has standards, she said. People like him don't get to ignore them. One officer looked at me, then back at her. His hand hovered near his radio. The crowd leaned in. This was the moment where things usually go wrong, where a lie, repeated loudly enough, turns into authority. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to feel threatening. Once they run your name, she whispered, you're done here. I didn't respond. Because I already knew something she didn't. She thought calling the police would end this. She thought proximity meant power. She thought being HOA president made her untouchable. But as the officer adjusted his stance and prepared to move closer to me, there was one simple truth she had never checked, and in a few moments, it was going to destroy everything she thought she controlled. Before we continue, drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this moment travels. If you believe power should never go unchecked, hit that like button and subscribe. I wasn't new to that road. I had been using it for months without a single issue. It cut past a gated community, ran alongside a few manicured lawns, then opened toward my property just beyond the neighborhood's boundary. No gate blocked it. No sign said I wasn't allowed. And most importantly, no document had ever placed my land under their HOA. Still, the warnings came. At first, they were polite. Printed notices taped to my fence. Emails forwarded through neighbors. Each one carried the same message, HOA compliance required. I ignored them, assuming it was a mistake. I had never signed an HOA agreement. My deed was clear. The county records were clear. Then the tone changed. The HOA president started showing up in person. A middle-aged woman with a clipboard and a voice trained to command. She spoke like she was used to being obeyed. She reminded me of fines that didn't apply to me, rules I never agreed to, and community standards she claimed gave her authority over anyone nearby. I tried to explain. Calmly. More than once. My property isn't part of your HOA, I told her. You don't have jurisdiction here. She never checked. She never asked for proof. She just smiled the way people do when they believe power is automatic. The final warning came that morning. If you don't leave immediately, she said, phone already in her hand, I'll have you removed. I didn't move. Because I knew the truth. And because I didn't expect her to make the mistake of calling the police to enforce rules that were never hers to enforce. The sirens didn't rush in. They rolled up slowly, deliberately, as if the outcome had already been decided. 2 patrol cars stopped near the curb, lights flashing just enough to draw attention without urgency. That was all the HOA president needed. She straightened her posture and walked toward them before the engines even shut off. This is him, she said, pointing at me. I told you on the phone. He refuses to leave. He's been warned repeatedly. Her confidence was absolute. She spoke in full sentences, with rehearsed frustration, like someone who had made this call before and knew exactly which words to use. Trespassing. Noncompliance. Refusal to cooperate. Each accusation landed cleanly, uncontested, at least at first. One of the officers approached me. Middle-aged, calm, professional. His tone was neutral, but his stance wasn't. "Sir, can you tell me why you're here today?" Before I could answer, she stepped between us. "He's violating HOA rules," she said. "This road is private. He doesn't belong here." The officer raised a hand slightly, signaling her to pause, but she kept going. "We've had problems with him before. He thinks he's above the rules." I noticed the neighbors gathering now. Doors opening. Phones lifting. People watching from behind hedges and parked cars. No one spoke up for me. They didn't know the facts, only the version being delivered with authority. The officer turned back to me. "Do you live in this community?" "No," I said calmly. Her head snapped toward me. "Exactly," she said, triumphant. "That's the problem." The officer nodded slowly, processing. "Are you part of the HOA?" "No, sir." She smiled again. Small. Controlled. "See? He's admitting it." The second officer stepped closer, hand resting near his belt. Not threatening, but ready. The unspoken pressure settled in. This was the moment where silence could be mistaken for guilt. I reached into my folder and held it up, not aggressively, just enough to be seen. "I'd like to answer properly," I said. "With documents." The HOA president laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to be dismissive. "Rules don't come from papers," she said. "They come from the community." The officer looked at her, then back at me. "Go ahead," he said. As I prepared to hand over the documents, she leaned in toward the officers, lowering her voice. "He's been difficult from the start," she added. "If you let him stay, he'll keep pushing." The pressure was clear now. Not just to remove me, but to make an example out of me. And as the officer unfolded the first page, I could see the confidence on her face slowly turning into something else, the moment authority meets facts it didn't expect. The officer studied the first document without reacting. He didn't nod. He didn't frown. Just read. That silence alone irritated her. "That paperwork doesn't matter," the HOA president said quickly. "HOA rules override individual claims. Everyone around here knows that." She stepped closer, angling her body between the officer and me, as if proximity could bend reality. The crowd shifted. Phones zoomed in. This wasn't just about enforcement anymore, it was about control. "Sir," she said to the officer, "this road is maintained by the HOA. That makes it private. He has no right to be here." I took a slow breath. "That's not accurate," I said evenly. "The county maintains this road. I have the records." She snapped her head toward me. "Do not interrupt," she said sharply. "You've had enough chances." The officer raised his eyes from the page. "Ma'am, he can speak." Her jaw tightened, but she forced a smile. "Of course. I just don't want this dragged out." Dragged out. As if truth was an inconvenience. I handed over the survey map next. Clear lines. Clear labels. The boundary marked in thick ink. The officer traced it with his finger. "That line is outdated," she said immediately. "We updated our boundaries years ago." "Through the county?" the officer asked. She hesitated. "Through the HOA board." The answer landed poorly. HOA rules can govern behavior, but they cannot redraw land. Everyone in that circle knew it. The officer's posture changed slightly. Not hostile. Just more alert. She felt it. "Look," she said, lowering her voice again, switching tactics. "We've had issues with him before. He ignores warnings. He challenges authority. If you let him stay, others will start doing the same." The second officer glanced at me. "Have you been warned before?" "Yes," I said. "About rules that don't apply to me." She scoffed. "Convenient." I opened the folder one last time and pulled out the deed. Original. Stamped. Clean. My property begins here, I said, pointing. Outside HOA limits. She waved her hand dismissively. That doesn't mean anything if you're using our access. The officer looked up. Access to what? Our community, she replied. Our infrastructure. He turned to me. Is there another way to reach your property? Yes, I said. This is the public easement. Her voice rose. He's twisting words. He knows what he's doing. The crowd murmured now. Not in support of her, in confusion. The certainty she had entered with was cracking. The officer asked again, slower this time. Ma'am, can you show me documentation that this property falls under your HOA? She reached into her bag, pulling out a thick binder. Pages flipped. Tabs slapped together. Her movements were fast, messy. These are our bylaws, she said. Section 12 clearly states. I don't need bylaws, the officer interrupted gently. I need jurisdiction. The word hit hard. She froze. Just for a second. Jurisdiction wasn't something she could shout into existence. It had to be proven. I'm the HOA president, she said firmly. That gives me authority here. No, the officer replied, calm but final. It gives you authority over members. The second officer shifted his weight, arms now crossed. The balance was changing. She tried one last angle. If you don't remove him, she said, you're setting a precedent. The officer met her eyes. The only precedent I care about is the law. Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. The phones kept recording. Then the officer asked the question that would end everything she believed she controlled. Can you show me proof, he said, that this man is actually part of your HOA? The officer's words hung in the air, heavier than any fine or threat the HOA president had thrown at me. Can you show me proof that this man is actually part of your HOA? She froze mid-step, her perfectly controlled posture betraying the first crack of panic. For a moment, the clipboard dropped slightly in her hands. Her practiced confidence, years of calling the shots, stumbled like a house of cards. Of course, she said finally, forcing her voice steady. I have the registry. Her eyes darted to her bag, rifling through papers as though speed could manufacture legitimacy. Tabs slapped together, pages rustled, pens clattered. The crowd shifted uneasily. Phones zoomed in. Even neighbors who had whispered support for her earlier now leaned closer, sensing something was off. The officer raised a brow. Ma'am? It's right here, she stammered, holding up a binder. It's all in Section 14, membership records. The officer reached for it, flipping slowly. Line by line, name by name, verification after verification. And then, nothing. Nothing? I asked calmly. No, she muttered under her breath. Exactly, I said. I am not, nor have I ever been, part of your HOA. My property is outside your jurisdiction. Everything you've been claiming is based on an assumption, not facts. The officer nodded slowly, folding the papers with deliberate care. His eyes were calm but firm, the type that tells a person in power that their bluff has been called. The crowd held its breath. Even a few HOA members in the back shifted uncomfortably. They had come expecting a scene where the homeowner, me, would be the villain. Now, the villain was standing in front of them, clipboard in trembling hands, forced to face the reality she had ignored for months. She tried to speak. This doesn't change the rules. It does when those rules don't apply to him, the officer said, cutting her off gently but firmly. You cannot enforce HOA rules on someone outside your HOA. That's harassment, and filing a false police complaint is serious. You've misused emergency services by calling us under false pretenses. Her lips tightened. Panic replaced confidence. The smirk she had worn when calling the police vanished. Every word she had spoken to neighbors, to officers, to the crowd, now exposed as empty authority. The crowd, previously tense and expectant, started murmuring. Phones continued recording. Their whispers transformed into stunned commentary. Wait, he isn't even in their HOA? She tried to have him arrested, for nothing? Wow, she's going to get in trouble. She shuffled papers desperately, trying to find something, anything, to prove she was right. But it wasn't there. It never had been. Her carefully constructed world of control had collapsed in front of a few officers, a few neighbors, and a man she assumed she could intimidate. The first officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, this ends now. You will document that no jurisdiction exists over this property. Any further action without authority will be considered harassment. Is that understood?" "Yes," she said quietly, almost whispering. The color had drained from her face. The second officer made a note in his pad, while the first glanced at me. "Sir, you're free to go. We'll make a record of the complaint and the situation." I nodded, keeping calm, but inside a slow satisfaction unfurled. Months of intimidation, threats, and false fines had led to this single moment. Silence, facts, and patience had done what confrontation alone could not. Even the neighbors were now watching differently. Some smiled, a few shook their heads, and one older man whispered, "She got exactly what she deserved." The HOA president tried one last feeble attempt at authority. "This doesn't change the fact that he's been using community access." The officer didn't flinch. "Access rights do not create membership. Your assumption that proximity grants authority has caused all of this. That's your responsibility." Her shoulders slumped. The clipboard fell to the pavement with a soft thud. She bent over to pick it up, avoiding everyone's gaze. The crowd's cameras captured every second, the humiliation, the collapse of power, the truth shining where intimidation once ruled. I finally stepped forward, calm but resolute. "Power isn't what people think it is," I said to the crowd, my voice steady. "It only exists when others believe it does. Facts beat assumptions. Authority without jurisdiction is just noise." The officer nodded, signaling the end of the encounter. She muttered something incoherent as she backed away. The neighbors whispered and recorded, still stunned. The entire performance of control had evaporated in minutes. In that moment, I realized that what she feared most wasn't confrontation. It was being exposed in front of everyone she thought she ruled over. And that fear had just materialized. Silence settled over the scene, broken only by the fading hum of the patrol cars. The HOA president walked away, defeated, clipboard clutched tightly like a shield she no longer had. And the neighborhood would remember this day, not the man she tried to arrest, but the collapse of a false authority she assumed she could wield. Justice, quiet and undeniable, had arrived. The HOA president's footsteps echoed awkwardly against the pavement as she backed away, but she hadn't walked far before she realized the full extent of what had just happened. The officers, calm but firm, were taking notes, documenting every moment. The crowd's phones continued recording, capturing every twitch, every stumble, every word she had spoken that now looked hollow. Neighbors who had once whispered approval of her authority now exchanged incredulous glances. Some shook their heads. A few muttered, "She really tried to do that?" The murmurs grew, spreading like wildfire through the small cluster of onlookers. Even the local delivery driver paused, phone in hand, watching the spectacle unfold. The first officer addressed her directly, his tone measured but uncompromising. "Ma'am, you misused emergency services by making a false police report. You attempted to enforce rules outside of your jurisdiction. Further actions of this type could lead to formal citations or legal consequences. Do you understand?" Her voice was almost inaudible. "Yes. I understand." The second officer added, glancing at me. "Sir, you are free to continue as you were. No further interference from this HOA is permitted." I nodded once, silently acknowledging the officer's words. There was no satisfaction in shouting, no need to gloat. The truth had been revealed in front of everyone, powerless, undeniable, and permanent. The HOA president tried one last desperate move, straightening her shoulders and lifting her voice in an attempt to regain composure. This doesn't change the fact that he's been using our community roads. The officer interrupted calmly. Use does not create membership. Your assumptions caused this incident. Any further harassment will be documented and may lead to legal action. That is your responsibility. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The clipboard, once a symbol of control, now lay on the ground, papers slightly fluttering in the breeze. She bent to retrieve it, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Every step was measured but reluctant, a defeated shuffle. The crowd had grown silent, the tension shifting from expectation to shock and, finally, to understanding. The humiliation was complete. She had called the police to assert authority over a man who had never agreed to her rules, never been part of her HOA, and never owed her anything. And now the spectacle of her failure was being shared on multiple phones, ready to spread online. Even a few HOA members, previously loyal, whispered among themselves. She'd really tried to have him arrested, one said. I can't believe she thought that would work, another replied. The officers finished documenting, walking back to their patrol cars. One glanced at me, a small nod acknowledging the calm professionalism I had maintained despite the intimidation and threats. The first officer's words lingered. Authority without jurisdiction is nothing. Facts are everything. As the patrol cars pulled away, the HOA president finally lifted her gaze, only to find neighbors staring, phones recording, and whispers following her. Her smirk was gone. Her voice had no weight. She had tried to create fear, to command respect, and all she had achieved was public exposure of her ignorance and abuse of power. I stepped forward slowly, letting the moment sink in. My voice carried easily, not loud, but unmistakable. Power isn't about titles. It's about responsibility. And responsibility without truth is meaningless. A few people clapped quietly. Others murmured agreement. Even the older man at the edge of the crowd nodded, shaking his head with a wry smile. The HOA president, realizing that her authority had crumbled in public, turned and walked away, leaving behind the clipboard and the echo of her failed intimidation. The scene was quiet now except for the soft murmur of neighbors discussing what had just occurred. Her attempt to control and intimidate had ended in the only way it could, exposed, humiliated, powerless. As I finally turned toward my property, the weight of the moment settled in. Months of threats, false fines, and aggressive warnings had culminated in this single, undeniable truth: authority without facts is empty, and the people who misuse it will be exposed. Justice had been served that day, not through confrontation, but through calm, documented truth, observed by everyone who had been present. And in the silent victory that followed, it was clear, sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't anger or shouting, it's patience, clarity, and the courage to stand firm while false authority collapses around you. The HOA president had retreated, her voice silenced, her authority exposed as empty. The crowd lingered for a few moments, recording the aftermath, whispering to one another about the spectacle they had witnessed. I stood quietly, letting the moment settle around me. No triumphal gestures. No celebrations. Just calm, undeniable truth. The officers had documented everything and returned to their cars. One gave me a small nod, a subtle acknowledgement that the rule of law had prevailed over assumption and intimidation. The other remained nearby, ensuring that the HOA president understood the boundaries of her power had been crossed, and that any further attempts to interfere would carry consequences. I finally turned toward my property, walking the path I had always had every right to take. The air felt lighter, the tension dissipating with every step. Months of warnings, threats, and false claims had culminated in this moment, where patience, facts, and calm observation had achieved what shouting and aggression could never have done. Authority, I realized, is fragile when it is assumed rather than earned. People may try to wield it, to intimidate and control, but when confronted with truth, it collapses. On that quiet road, in front of neighbors and officers alike, justice had spoken. And sometimes, the most powerful victory isn't in confrontation, it's in standing firm, letting facts do the talking, and watching those who misuse power expose themselves completely. The HOA president learned a lesson that day, and so did anyone watching. True authority can't be claimed, it must be justified, and without truth, it is nothing at all.